In recent weeks and months, we have seen increased numbers of reports saying that a Russian intervention in Ukraine is becoming more and more likely. Starting in 2014, with the invasion of Crimea by little green men, that resulted in the region's transference from Ukraine to Russia, and the start of a conflict in eastern parts of Ukraine between Russian separatists and Ukrainian nationalists and armed forces, we have seen an ever-growing tension between these two countries, once considered brothers. Now, amidst all of these reports of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, comes the question, would it be wise for Russia to avoid a larger military conflict in Ukraine? And the answer to this question is yes, for the following three reasons. One, Russian intervention in Ukraine runs the risk of Ukraine joining NATO. Number two, Russia is currently too reliant on private military contractors. And three, this would prove to be a second Afghanistan for Russia. Starting with my first contention. According to Reuters, on June 17th, 2021, the Kremlin released a statement about Ukraine joining NATO as a red line. What does this actually mean? It means that Russia is very, very nervous about the possibility of Ukrainian entry into NATO, because this would bring the United States, its main enemy geopolitically, right up to its border. This would make the distance between a NATO allied country and Moscow less than 2,000 kilometers, which would make it well within range of American bombers and missiles were this to ever happen. According to another report by Reuters, on September 20th, 2021, the Ukrainian military and the United States military have been conducting joint military drills. Again, this reaffirms the possibility of Ukraine joining NATO, as it seems to be very reliant on military support from the United States, to where even its own armed forces are conducting joint drills with the US military and American advisors. This means that it is very possible, with these ties to America, for Ukraine to join NATO if it were to feel threatened by a Russian invasion. Moving on to the second point of Russia being too reliant on private military contractors. According to CSIS, on July 7th, 2021, the Kremlin has increased its use of private military contractors across the board, including in Ukraine. What this means is that the majority of the forces in eastern Ukraine currently fighting the Ukrainian military are not in fact Russian military personnel, but instead mercenaries or private military contractors hired by the Kremlin. And what this also means is that in the event of an actual war, the Russian military would not be the first ones fighting. This is bad for Russia because having a main presence of mercenaries over your own armed forces makes the situation a lot less predictable, and it means that Russian generals will have a lot less control over such an invasion. Also, according to the Brookings Institute, on March 30th, 2021, the private military contractors it employs allows it to exert influence and pressure Ukraine without using its own military. This means that it is ultimately more beneficial for Russia to use and remain using its current private military contractors over a direct invasion, because these private military contractors allow Russia to accomplish its goals in Ukraine, i.e. diverting diplomatic pressure and subverting the region's stability, without actually having to send boots on the ground from the Russian armed forces. which allows Russia to maintain Ukraine as a buffer between itself and NATO without necessarily having to invade itself, which would be a bad idea for reason number 3. This would very quickly become an Afghanistan 2.0. According to the RAND Institute, on April 28th, 2021, Russia has become very risk-averse in its foreign policy ever since Afghanistan. It has become very hesitant to directly deploy military forces in various regions, even on its own borders, hence its commitment to private military contractors. Also, according to The Guardian, on January 19th, 2020, Russia has been actively hiding its casualty count ever since 2015. And this is because, with the memory of Afghanistan still on the minds of many Russians, the Kremlin wants to, at all costs, avoid the true scale of the war being leaked to the public, which would be a lot harder to do in a bigger conflict, such as a direct intervention into Ukraine. Thus, the answer to the question, would it be wise for Russia to avoid a larger conflict in Ukraine, is yes, for the 3 reasons that, number 1, it runs the risk of Ukraine joining NATO. Number 2, Russia is already using private military contractors to accomplish its goals. And 3, this would quickly become a second Afghanistan. Thank you.